Good evening, this is Stephen. Let's dip into my world so you know what to look for in yours. Yesterday we began dipping into the audiobook The Reveal, written by David Icke. We explored in that chapter, the first chapter, that the world is not how we think we see it, if I've listened to that correctly, and there is a strong possibility that interdimensional beings, which cannot be seen with the naked eye, are from afar controlling politicians, government officials, and creating a world where, much like the film The Matrix, human beings are being used as an energy source. Now, we didn't get that far, but this isn't the first book that I've heard or read of David Icke's, so I actually know where he's going with this. To a degree, I haven't heard any of this new book, The Reveal, but I just wanted to throw some energy out there, because when you listen to the BBC News and you listen to podcasts, we seem to be going out of the frying pan and into the fire. The global politics seems to be every man for himself, every country for himself. The president of Argentina is now facing corruption charges because he too started a meme coin, and he, what is known in the trade as, pulled the rug from underneath anyone else buying it. So what he would have done, if the allegations are true, allegedly, is when the coin was created, let's say for instance there was 10,000 coins, he would have bought the first 1,000. Then as people started to buy the next 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, his original 1,000 would be going up astronomically as everyone else piles in and increases the value of his first original coins. And then, out of the blue, he would have sold 1/10 of the cryptocurrency, kept the wealth. On the charts, a dip would have started out of nowhere, quite substantial. It would have started a panic, and everyone else would have started selling their particular cryptocurrency coins at the same time. And so if you bought, let's say, £1,000 at 9,000, it means you've got to fall all the way back down to the bottom, and you've got absolutely no way of getting your money back unless it climbs back to 9,000, where you originally began. And then you need more people to buy it, to send it past 9,000 into the 10, 11,000s. But who's going to buy a coin that's now being subjected to, subjected to an investigation for corruption? Everyone's going to avoid it like the plague. And so all these people who bought at the top have lost. Yesterday I bought some more Blur, another £20. Best buy yet. I got another 100 and I think it was 188 coins. But Blur, for a start, has a purpose. It can be used to buy and sell NFTs, which we've discussed earlier. And because it's got a purpose, it's allowed on various sites, including Coinbase, Revolut. I believe it's on Robinhood, but I don't have the app, but I believe it's there. And so it's internationally known. And of course, of late, I saw yesterday, I bought that £20 and it was 93rd in the ranking, which really surprised me because it means people are buying it in the dip, because even at 10 pence, it's gone up in the ranking, although the price hasn't. So people are cutting on to the fact that this coin moves just like Bitcoin. It will go up and down at the same time. But what basically is happening is people realise they've got no chance of becoming a millionaire if they buy Bitcoin now. So they need an equivalent right at the bottom that can move like Bitcoin but doesn't cost as much, which was obviously Blur. I don't think David Icke is into much of this sort of stuff, to be honest with you, with cryptocurrencies. In David Icke's mind, the world is surrounded by reptilian, or as I call them, lizard people, reptilians controlling the show. So let's see what he has in store with us as we take a deep dive into the reveal, chapter 2. Alexa, play.
Barricade Brigade. Top of chapter quote, "You get diminishing returns when you are restricted to your comfort zone."
Alexa, restart the chapter.
Chapter 2, Barricade Brigade. Top of chapter quote, "You get diminishing returns when you are restricted to your comfort zone." Sunday, Adelasia. There was no alternative or independent media when I had my explosive awakening in 1990. See the trap. A small number of largely disparate individuals worldwide were exposing the conspiracy in those days. I would talk to minute audiences and rows of empty chairs, and only dogged determination drove me on. I watched the alternative media appear and grow, and I've observed with a shaking head as it's been hijacked since COVID by many main chancers, superstar wannabes, repeaters of other people's research, and a few key agents of the cult. Demonic conspirators seeking to impose global dystopia would rather everyone just believe their lies and official narrative that society must become authoritarian because of COVID, the human-caused climate change hoax, and all the other manipulated crises. They know, since the emergence of the alternative media, now massive by comparison with decades ago, that increasing numbers of their target population won't buy those narratives. A fallback position is necessary. This requires the infiltration and hijacking of the, quote, new media to hold the line of here and no further, to misdirect and give them conspiracies to chew on while ensuring they're the wrong conspiracies. Locking away the alternative in the left side of the brain would be another bonus. Meanwhile, those who won't compromise on the truth or limit where their research will take them are marginalized, while safe people are algorithmically and financially promoted. The mainstream media ridiculed me as a nutter for a long time after 1990, and this turned to abuse and demonization as my research expanded and I refused to disappear. The approach changed again after early 2020, when I accurately exposed the COVID hoax, and since then I've been largely ignored and banned. I'm currently banned from 29 European countries of the Schengen border system and Australia. I would find that I'm banned from many others if I try to enter. There is one law for the safe and another for the dangerous.
Don't call yourself dangerous.
An example of calculated misdirection of the now hijacked center of the new media is that the COVID virus was released by design by the Chinese government from a biolab in Wuhan, where the, quote, virus supposedly first appeared. Conspiracy researchers jumped on the release by design bioweapon story, and fantastic numbers of hours, days, weeks, years have been wasted following this fabricated false trail, to the point where even many politicians, including presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr., have picked up the theme. This has diverted attention from the fact that there is no COVID virus, and so no variants or need for the global campaign of mass vaccination with a vaccine, in quotes, which does not fulfill previous definitions of a vaccine.
Here we go.
Kennedy has done great work exposing the fake vaccine, but in other ways he promotes the cult agenda. He named American entrepreneur Nicole Shanahan as his vice presidential running mate in 2024. Shanahan was married to Google founder Sergey Brin until 2022, when the marriage ended after she reportedly had an affair with Elon Musk. She donated $4 million of the $7 million cost of a 30-second commercial for Kennedy played during the Super Bowl. It's a small world at the top. The fake COVID pandemic is a wonderful example of how the cult's perceptual manipulation works, and why being seriously informed and streetwise to the techniques is essential to be a proper alternative journalist, which by that criteria, there are relatively few. How do you get billions of people, most of the alternative media, to believe that the virus exists when, well, it doesn't? Here's how. Number one, repetition. You repeat through a compliant and unquestioning media that there is a virus which is potentially deadly. You induce the belief that it must exist because everyone else believes that it does. Why? Everyone falls for the same repetition. As the Nazis said, repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. These lies are underpinned by images of people with the virus collapsing in the street in China, but not subsequently anywhere else.
I saw that, yeah.
And hospitals overrun with virus patients when they were really empty. Yes, empty. They were cleared of other patients to cope with the victims of the virus, of which there were few, and in truth, none. How could there be when there is no virus? Britain's ITV produced a docudrama series in 2024, grotesquely misrepresenting what happened. Breathtaking was perception manipulating gaslighting in the extreme, portraying overrun hospitals that were, in fact, virtually devoid of patients. The series will have been made for calculated reasons of misdirection in readiness for the next, quote, pandemic.
Oh.
Even the few patients that were in hospital with, quote, COVID were misdiagnosed on the basis of symptoms of the virus claimed by medical authorities, taking direction from the cult-owned World Health Organization. The WHO was created by the cult Rockefeller family in 1948 and is run on their behalf by major funder and Rockefeller gopher Bill Gates. The left brain is ensnared by the need for the virus to exist to explain all the illness. The right brain and whole brain says, but why are they ill? Is there more to know? Number 2, symptoms were described as flu-like, and immediately flu was re-diagnosed COVID, along with pneumonia and any other respiratory disease, and more symptoms were constantly added to draw in other conditions that could be redesignated COVID. This is why cases of flu disappeared worldwide once the COVID hoax began. You don't need a virus to generate illness when you can redesignate illness from other causes as your fake virus. The right brain, and especially whole brain, can see this. The left brain cannot. It sees parts, not connections. Number 3, the illusion of cases came from testing positive for COVID with the PCR test that was not testing for the virus. PCR test creator, the Nobel Prize-winning American biochemist Kary Mullis, had long confirmed this. Mullis conveniently died just before the COVID hoax was played. He would otherwise have been screaming from the rooftops what he had said about his PCR test when it was used to diagnose the equally never proven to exist HIV virus. He said, "The PCR test cannot tell if you are sick." 4, the concept of asymptomatic or no symptom transmission was lied into being to justify lockdowns, increase the fear, and explain why everyone with no symptoms had to be constantly mass tested with a PCR test not testing for the virus. Billions of perfectly healthy people were decreed to be a COVID case when there was nothing wrong with them. The PCR protocol tests for fragments of genetic material, and the more you amplify the test, the more fine detail of genetic material is accessed to ping the result as a positive. Amplification levels used around the world were purposely so high that samples of a goat, a pawpaw fruit, even cola, came back positive for COVID. 5, fictitious COVID deaths were secured by the outrageous policy of putting COVID on the death certificates of anyone who died from any other cause within 28 days, and sometimes more, of a positive test not testing for the virus. People were recorded as COVID deaths or COVID related when they died in road accidents, fell down the stairs, or were killed by gunshots. They were even testing dead people after they died of other causes to increase the delusion of COVID fatalities. The left brain is limited by the perceptions of, they would never do that. The right brain and whole brain has the perceptual expansion to see that they would and they were. 6, other magician-level techniques included the tens of thousands of old people who died in UK care homes and in other countries after being literally murdered using a combination of the drugs midazolam and morphine. Midazolam is an end-of-life drug used to usher people into the next world and is employed by some American states in the execution process. Record quantities of midazolam were ordered by the UK government under, quote, Health Secretary Matt Hancock in the spring of 2020 and used in record quantities to produce the mass deaths they called the first wave of COVID. One of the consequences of midazolam in the doses used? Respiratory failure. Oh, look, it's COVID. 7. US government COVID overseer Anthony Fauci, a mass murderer on an industrial scale,
I'm not going to get this
decreed
on
that the
YouTube.
drug remdesivir be used on people who tested positive for COVID with a test not testing for it. He well knew the consequences of remdesivir from studies he'd seen in relation to Ebola, for which it was soundly rejected as a treatment. Fauci knew that remdesivir would cause multiple organ failure. Remdesivir blocks kidney function, and the abdominal cavity fills with fluid. This enters the lungs to cause respiratory failure, which is recorded as COVID. 8. Financial incentives were given to hospitals and medical facilities to diagnose other conditions as COVID. The US government paid them $4,600 for a patient diagnosed with regular pneumonia, $13,000 for each diagnosis of COVID-19 pneumonia, and $39,000 for every COVID diagnosed patient put on a ventilator that would almost certainly kill them. These were just some of the ways they made billions believe in a virus pandemic without any need for the virus to exist. Key players such as Bill Gates, World Health Organization chief Ted Ross, Anthony Fauci, and their like were well aware there was no COVID virus when they used the lie of its existence to fake vaccinate billions for reasons I'll be explaining. These jabs have killed or destroyed the health for life of staggering numbers of people. See my book, The Answer, for a detailed and absolutely devastating demolition of the COVID hoax. The almost unimaginable level of deceit that I've described is only a glimpse of what we are dealing with. The cult is expert at manipulating perception in extremely subtle as well as obvious ways. To see through it requires the streetwiseness that comes from detailed research and long experience picking through the calculated cul-de-sacs and diversions. It most certainly requires a mind free from preconceived beliefs of any kind, and one that has no limits on where it is prepared to go. A mind that is free of concern about what others think of what is presented. The fear of what others think, the fear of damaging your image, is the death knell to accurately researching the world.
That I agree with.
Left-brain domination of the mainstream alternative arena meant that its perceptual limitations resisted the idea that the conspiracy was so deep that there was no virus. People are ill. I saw it on the news. There must be a virus. To the left-brain logic, it must have come out of the Wuhan laboratory where viruses are researched in the city where, quote, COVID broke out. They didn't research the shockingly ludicrous techniques through which all viruses are claimed to exist. See The Answer. And that made them pawns in a game that they largely didn't understand. The right brain, whole brain, can see that the literal existence of a COVID virus was not necessary, only the perception of its existence. If they scam the cases through an illusory test, scam the illness by diagnosing other conditions as COVID-19, scam the fatalities with fraudulent death certificates, and murdered people with midazolam, morphine, and remdesivir while calling it COVID, where was the sodding virus then? Where's the bioweapon when you need to set up all these manipulations to produce your alleged cases and deaths? The right brain, whole brain can see that if you want to lead alternative researchers into a diversionary dead end, you give them crumbs to follow to the Wuhan lab. You know that how and why they believe the virus was real is irrelevant as long as they do believe in it. Once that's achieved, they must further believe there is a tangible threat of some kind to deal with. The Wuhan lab bioweapon theory was born from a belief in the bioweapon virus, when the bioweapon was always going to be the fake vaccine. Seeing there was no virus meant there was nothing to deal with. COVID wasn't just partly a scam, it was all a scam, every last syllable. This is the difference between what I call the mainstream alternative media, or MAM, and pursuing the unfiltered truth without regard for how people will react. Some MAMs call me a purist, and if that means that I want the truth for the truth's sake, no matter what people think of me, then I'm fine with that. The alternative media has exploded since I started out, and especially since COVID. That's great, but it doesn't mean the alternative must never be questioned. We must question everything, including ourselves. How much of this alternative is truly independent and always in search of greater understanding? If we mean financially independent, well, no, it's not. Many are far less dependent than the mainstream, which exists only because of advertisers, sponsors, and often billionaire owners, all of which have self-interest as their driving force. The mainstream media needs to keep those people happy, and that means not publishing material at odds with their personal or collective agendas. Mainstream media reflects the norms that don't upset the advertisers, sponsors, and billionaire owners, and don't expose the cult's plans for humanity. The cult owns the mainstream media through its gophers and assets. This, by definition, ensures mainstream, quote, journalism is firmly trapped in the left side of the brain and here and no further. It reports the world of physical illusion and tells us lies by reflex action, either directly or through suppression of the truth. The alternative, too, depends on advertising, product sales, subscriptions, and clicks. The difference has been that such support has come from far more open-minded sources that want to see beyond the lies. There has been, until more recently, far more independence and leeway before potential supporters and funders say that's far enough, and this has allowed more expression of the right brain, whole brain. The question is, how much? To what extent is that leeway in the independent sector now being curtailed by a combination of funder resistance and self-censorship? The answer dictates what the independent will report and how far it will go. Some will say that I'm going too far in my criticism and questioning of the mainstream of the alternative media. I trust that before the book is complete, you will see why I am so unrelenting and concerned about the way things are shaping up. COVID changed the game in that many more people saw that the world is not as they believed it to be. Rapid alternative media expansion reflected that.
I agree.
Are we really so naive that we believe the global cult would leave it alone and not seek to infiltrate and misdirect? It can't close the stable door, but it can make sure the horse ends up in another field of limitation. This is happening, as I will detail. The alternative media that I knew has been hijacked by newbies who have arrived since COVID, many of whom bought the COVID hoax, and now present themselves as stars of the new media while marginalizing those who have been researching for decades and exposed COVID from the start. The newbie stars are being massively promoted to vast audiences thanks to algorithmic boosting, while the real alternative is artificially suppressed or shadow banned by the same algorithms or banned altogether. This is very dangerous in that genuine truth seekers are being eclipsed in reach by basically know-littles who hold the line of here and no further as the cult presses on with its agenda of total human control. The Titanic is sinking, while so much of the mainstream alternative media, MAM, focuses its efforts and its audience attention on rearranging the deck chairs. Great swathes of the alternative media, especially in North America, are founded on the Christian belief system, which represents a crucial block on free and open research. Possibilities and provable facts are dismissed if they would demolish or even challenge Christian belief.
Alex Jones.
You can't uncover the expanded truth of what is happening if you have any inbuilt no-go areas, and much of the alternative operates this way. I've been told by Christians that they like some of what I'm saying, but they can't support me if I don't believe in Jesus. Others have called me satanic for not accepting the literal existence of Jesus as our Savior. Many times I've been asked if I believe in Jesus as my Savior as a test for the credibility of what I say and write. When is humanity going to grow up to the extent that teeming masses of them don't think they require a Savior? Please save me. No problem. We have a long list of saviors on our payroll. We have political saviors, religious saviors, take your pick. Famed, infamous, American Freemason and cult operative Albert Pike, 1809 to 1891, said, quote, "Whenever the people need a hero, we shall provide him," end quote. Stop looking for a hero and be one. The existence of the Christian version of Jesus is confined almost entirely to a Bible written by who knows when, in who knows what circumstances, and then rewritten by the, quote, church. Religious belief is their certainty, and their left brain must have that for comfort and solace. To have those claiming to be exposing deceit and lies blindly following a religion founded on deceit, lies, and symbolism taken literally is quite a contradiction. Biblical history, and especially Old Testament Jewish history, is easy to debunk. You have the meticulous documentation left us by ancient Egyptians, not even mentioning what should have been the major event of Moses and the Israelites fleeing the Pharaoh across the parting Red Sea. Where is any evidence of the 40 years of desert exile that followed? Shlomo Sand, professor of history at Tel Aviv University, set out to prove the biblical Israel story was true and soon found there was no evidence for it. This led to his 2008 book, The Invention of the Jewish People.
Oof.
Christians in the truth movement ignore this and crack on regardless in their belief that the Bible is the word of God. I have met some who do see the lack of Old Testament evidence and still go on believing that the book is God's word. Just not that bit. The biggest conspiracy that must be exposed, in my view, is the reincarnation trap that manipulates, quote, souls to keep returning to this simulated shithole while believing they are learning lessons to evolve and grow.
Shithole's a bit rough.
Where do you start with Christians and Jews that don't even accept the possibility of reincarnation, not mentioned in the Bible? Or with Muslims who also reject reincarnation, or Hindus who believe the reincarnation cycle is God's plan so we can evolve and grow? That's 5.4 of the 8 billion humans spoken for straight away.
Cynical and banned.
I was invited to do a live interview in front of a large audience in Manchester, England, by James Delingpole, a Christian believer who now claims to be an alternative journalist. He is definitely MAM material. Delingpole had a career in the mainstream with major UK newspapers, including the Daily Mail and Telegraph. His awakening and intelligent sister had been reading my book since the 1990s, much to the amusement of Delingpole. Then COVID arrived in 2020 and he changed his mind. Well, sort of. The audience in Manchester was a mix of people who came to hear me and others that came for Delingpole. He introduced the subject of religion and reality. I gave my views on this, including the non-human manipulation and simulated nature of the human world, and he became very discourteous and belligerent. I was questioning his certainty. The next day, he posted on Twitter that we had disagreed, but it was all good debate, while posting on Telegram to his followers an aggressive condemnation of me and my views. It was fascinating to see at close range how a believer reacts to someone with a different position. He posted, quote, "My take home from this is that I am authentic, Icke is not," end quote. This was the guy who had laughed at the idea of a conspiracy until 2020, now condemning someone as inauthentic who'd been calling it out since 1990. He followed this with further abuse and said I was leading people into the New Age. I've seen this so many times with biblical ignorance. Talk about metaphysics and frequencies, and you must be New Age, even though I've exposed the New Age movement as a diversion. Delingpole derided my mention of frequencies. I guess it's not in the Bible. His Christian supporters were cheering him on. One posting tagged Ben Bootneck said of me, quote, "Finally the truth. The man is a fraud, a charlatan, a bullshitting con artist, and a 33rd degree Freemason Jesuit agent. Thank God you've seen through this charade, Dellers, and exposed him as such. He's under the control of Satan, and as such should now be chided, derided, and mocked as such. Odious, despicable Luciferians, as are his C-word sons," end quote. How very Christian. Apparently, my 35 years of work and taking untold abuse and ridicule was only, quote, "to provide an adequate release valve for public dissatisfaction and frustration at the system, and, quote, "to provide very precise glimpses of the enslavement plan while providing no solutions apart from waking people up," which is one hell of a solution.
Yeah.
These brains of Britain decided this was not good enough. From those comments alone, such people have no idea what I'm saying and can't be bothered to find out. They're unbelievably superficial while claiming to be some intellectual giant. I asked Delingpole, while he was condemning me on stage, how many books of mine he had read, and he replied, "None." Great swathes of the alternative are full of shit and taking people nowhere except dystopian oblivion. This is only one small example of how Christian belief and religious belief in general is a reinforced concrete wall blocking the way to where we need to go to understand the scale of this conspiracy and how to overcome it. The Christian-dominated truth movement has a foundation of hear and no further on that basis alone. And there are other incentives for self-censorship in the independent sector. Audiences for much alternative content, again, especially in North America, are dominated by Christian believers, and this makes hosts and channels often very reluctant to upset or lose those people by saying anything that would outrage them. Here we have another research and communication blocker. If you A, have a rigid belief system, or B, give a damn about what anyone thinks of you, then you will always go so far and stop. That's not very far either in many cases. Only by working on the premise of knowing how little we know, constantly fluid perception, and refusing to censor ourselves in fear of what others think, can we cast aside all limitation of where we will go and let information and evidence be our only criteria for what we say and do. The truth will always elude us without the dot-connecting right brain that sees the panorama and connections. The right brain connects the dots while the left sees only dots and a partners. How much the right brain is involved and how unblocked or restricted is the corpus callosum communication channel will dictate how far and how deep we will go. Much of the mainstream alternative is dominated by the left brain with some input from the right, although often not that much. The prime theme of this level of the alternative is seeing the manipulations of the 5-sense left brain realm of politics and finance. This involves the World Economic Forum of cult gopher Klaus Schwab, blatant cult operative Bill Gates, and other, quote, globalists behind the centralization of power via cult fronts such as the Rockefeller-Gates-controlled World Health Organization, International Monetary Fund, IMF, G20, NATO, European Union, and the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, which is the private cult organization that covertly coordinates global financial policy between, quote, national central banks. Only a little right brain is required to chart the connections between that lot once you start. I'm not saying that exposing this level of the conspiracy is not important. I've been doing it myself for 35 years, and long before today's alternative media even existed. I do it every day on davidicke.com. I'm saying that while these matters have to be exposed, they are only symptoms of an infinitely greater conspiracy for human enslavement that is far more essential to know. Those that attract the biggest alternative audiences are largely ignoring this and focusing only on the 5 cents here and now. I don't think this is a coincidence. I cringe a little bit when I hear people talk about the globalists. I've observed how this is often code for a here and no further mind. The globalists are a fraction of what is going on. I refer to the central core of the new media as the mainstream alternative media, or MAM, and its advocates and stars now stride the central stage of alternative attention. They include people like Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, and Brett Weinstein. They've since been joined by Alex Jones and others. MAMs are invariably supporters and followers of the new MAM god, the now everywhere you look, Elon Musk. I've been tracking Musk for a very long time, and if I have ever seen a fraud, a wolf in sheep's clothing, it is him. I saw this way before the cult sold him Twitter, now X. I knew when this happened that it was a scam with a longer-term motive and that free speech was only a cover. Most of the MAMs, with the exception of people like Alex Jones, are very or relatively recent additions to the alternative, and they have taken it over in terms of public and mainstream attention. I'm not saying for a second that they are knowingly working for, quote, them. Some MAMs will be plants, including Musk, in my opinion. Most will not. Mass promoting those with a limited knowledge of the big picture that suits your here and no further ambitions is all you need to do. Media personality, comedian, and briefly Hollywood actor Russell Brand did not appear on this scene until after the COVID card was played, and indeed took the piss and used me as a prop for his jokes when I was on some of his shows long before he saw the light. Brand has reinvented himself many times, and now he's a campaigner for truth. Rogan was paid a reported $200 million by the very mainstream Spotify for his internet podcast, and in February 2024, Spotify announced a new deal estimated by the Wall Street Journal to be worth $250 million, which would make his show available as well on other platforms, including Apple, Amazon, and YouTube. You don't get that phenomenal sum for a podcast and that mainstream internet exposure if you're a threat to the system. Reading some of the comments on the story from people supposedly awake was perhaps even more shocking. These were some of them. Those efforts by the left to cancel him really paid off, huh? Sounds like the perfect time for Joe Rogan to interview Tucker Carlson. He deserves every penny of it. Joe has the constitution to stand up for everyday Americans, the most rare quality among his peers. Whoa, the most influential podcast is going to get louder. Joe Rogan's continued to push the envelope in terms of what a podcast can accomplish. This is wonderful news. Big win for free speech. Arguably the most influential person on planet Earth right now is about to have even more reach. This is massive, considering how important the election this year is. End quotes. These were literally among the first few, and it went on and on like that. I didn't see any at the time asking why someone they believe is a threat to the system would be paid $250 million by the system to broadcast on mainstream internet platforms owned by the system. You ask this question, and what comes back is, you're just jealous. These people are not awake.
I was literally going to say that.
They're in a coma. The most prominent mams, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, Alex Jones, Andrew Tate, Russell Brand, and Jordan Peterson,
Stephen Peace,
mostly promote, defend, and interview each other. There is friction between a few, but mostly that's how it works. Carlson interviews Brand, Brand interviews Carlson, Carlson interviews Tate, Rogan interviews Peterson, Brand interviews Peterson, Carlson interviews Peterson, Rogan interviews Carlson, Peterson interviews Shapiro, Shapiro interviews Peterson, Brand interviews Shapiro, Rogan interviews Shapiro, Jones interviews Tate, Rogan interviews Jones, Jones interviews Rogan, Rogan interviews Brand, Rogan interviews Musk, Jones interviews Musk, Carlson interviews Jones. People like Tate, Peterson, and Shapiro also enjoy many mainstream interviews for apparently alternative people. Among mainstream hosts who invite them is Piers Morgan, once of the Murdoch station Talk TV, and now on YouTube. Russell Brand was 15 when I began my journey of exposure in 1990, and Joe Rogan was a 22-year-old hoping to be a comedian while I was facing decades of ridicule and abuse for exposing what these people now attract multiple millions for basically repeating in a much milder version. Tucker Carlson was a 21-year-old and still a year from graduation. Jordan Peterson was 28 and working for his PhD in clinical psychology in Canada. Andrew Tate was 4. I've been on this road for a very long time, but they are here now, and they are promoted to worldwide public attention. None of this explains why I am so vehement in my exposure of Elon Musk and those who are building a limitation barricade around the alternative media. The reason is that they are hijacking the focus of the alternative arena and reacting to only 5-cent events. These are the symptoms of the conspiracy, not the cause. Without getting to the cause, there can be no deletion of the cause, or as a result, a deletion of the problem. Andrew Tate, the Muslim converted son of a CIA operative, he says, is supposed to be persona non grata, and yet he's been given a stream of high-profile mainstream media interviews to promote himself as a champion of men. His one trick is to correctly point out that there is a war on the male, ignoring the gathering war on the female. Both sexes are being targeted because the cult is in the process of eliminating both to create a new, far more synthetic, technologically procreated and androgynous human 2.0, as I've highlighted in my books for many years and is now becoming blatantly obvious. We have the mass fake vaccination of self-replicating synthetic material in the COVID jab, and the emergence of synthetic biology, or synbio, as a fast-growing discipline of mainstream science, with its obsession with replacing the perceived natural with synthetic copies. This includes body parts and, in the end, whole bodies. Rapidly falling sperm counts around the world is the calculated elimination of male-female procreating human 1.0. All of this is lost on Tate, who meets the challenge of male suppression by telling young men to assert themselves with women and equate power and success with having lots of money and an expensive fancy car. You want to be a man? Get yourself a Bugatti like me. It's not barely one-dimensional or anything. Andrew Tate is not a threat to the New World Order, but his promotion as a threat gives him credibility with his audience. As I write, he's not allowed to leave Romania over sexual abuse allegations, which he vehemently denies. He was a kickboxer who came to the fore in 2016 on the UK TV show Big Brother, created by Dutch media tycoon John de Mol Jr., who was named as one of the 500 richest men in the world. Joe Rogan is a former small-time kickboxer who got his first TV break on a US game show called Fear Factor, produced by John de Mol Jr. Andrew Tate has made endless claims and boasts about his life that researchers say are not supportable by the evidence. He claims to be the smartest person on the planet, when you only have to listen to his self-obsessed bullshit for 60 seconds to know that is seriously not the case. Another MAM barricade brigader is Canadian psychologist and academic Jordan Peterson, who came to prominence in 2016 for his refusal to bow to the tyranny of enforced use of preferred pronouns and political correctness in general. Good on him, too. If someone with a male body wants to call himself Miss or they, them, that's up to they, them. It's none of my business what they call themselves. Just don't tell me to refer to someone as a female when they're obviously a bloke. I won't do it. I have self-respect, and I'll decide how I see reality, not some woke extremist. I am with Peterson on this. The problem with the barricade brigade is that they come into the arena via one dot or subject, and then think they know what's going on across the spectrum when they're babes in arms to the real panorama. This makes them easy to manipulate through their lack of knowledge. Peterson, for example, has made dismissive comments about people, quote, believing that reptiles run the world, when he has no idea if that's true or not. The severe limitations imposed by his left brain tell him that it can't be true when it breaches his perception of normal. There's no need for an open mind or further research. His left brain has spoken and decreed the limits of his reality. He is a classic left-brainer, along with the majority of the MAM. He has a few interesting things to say about psychology here and there from a left-brain perspective. Mostly, he only states the obvious. His allegedly profound statements, when broken down, are often meaningless, and he reminds me of the Peter Sellers character in the movie Being There, released in 1979. Sellers plays the gardener of a wealthy resident in Washington, D.C., and he never left the property. His benefactor dies, and events lead him to becoming celebrated as a genius intellectual who is introduced to the US president. He's talking about gardening, which they mistake for incredible insights on the world and economy. Sellers says, quote, as long as the roots are not severed, all is well, and all will be well in the garden. In the garden, growth has its seasons. First comes the spring and summer, but then we have fall and winter, and then we get spring and summer again. End quote. This is taken as a statement about the economy. There will be growth in the spring, when he is a gardener talking about his garden. I see this theme in many of Peterson's perceived profound statements that are actually not. He nevertheless built an enormous following and began to comment on matters that he knew nothing about. This is a major defect of the man. It has become top-heavy since COVID, with people who are clueless about the totality of the conspiracy and how that impacts on world events. Peterson was hired on a stupendous salary by the Daily Wire in the United States, headed by the ultra-Zionist Israel First, Second and Last, Ben Shapiro, who, like Peterson, had the COVID jab and then complained that the government had lied to him about it. You would think that as a self-proclaimed alternative journalist, this would be a gimme. Not so. The idea is to expose lies, not fall for them. Peterson said during COVID, quote, "Why did I get the vaccine? Balance of risk, I suppose. I don't need COVID. I've had enough health trouble and I had COVID. So I had COVID and I got the vaccine because some of my blood markers indicated that my immunity might not be what it should be. Was this the right thing to do? How the hell do I know? I don't bloody well know. I don't think that vaccine makers are conspiratorial fundamentally, or any more than any other organization. I wanted to stop worrying about COVID. It seemed to me that case rates plummeted after the vaccine was strong. I am sick and tired of the lockdowns and assume that if in Canada we reach a certain threshold of vaccinated people, that it would be done with, and I'm ready for that and willing to take some risk for it." End quote. If I needed a single quote to justify my contention that know-nothings have hijacked the alternative media, then that is it. To think this bloke is even considered alternative when he fell for every lie and perceptual trap of the COVID hoax says everything about the man. The guy who spoke those words was even being praised in March 2024 for attacking a big pharma and COVID supporting chap in an interview. This is a theme of the new media ma'am. Those who bought the hoax now being promoted as activists against something they bought in its entirety at the time. More than that, they are considered experts on a global conspiracy about which they know nothing. The idea of alternative journalism is not to be wise after the event, when you've bought the hoax and the gathering consequences make it more acceptable to challenge. It is being researched streetwise and courageous enough to call it out when it is happening. Shapiro took Peterson on the Israel propaganda tour to meet the many times Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. What followed was Shapiro interviewing Netanyahu like a little boy in awe of his dad. Another recording had Netanyahu talking with Peterson, who let the mass-murdering tyrant get away unchallenged with outrageous claims. Netanyahu even boasted that he turned the Israeli people into a, quote, Pfizer lab for their fake vaccine during COVID. Peterson drooled over his Bibi. And when the latest mass bombing by Israel of Gaza was about to begin in October 2023, he posted on Twitter X, quote, "Give 'em hell at Netanyahu. Enough is enough," end quote. Netanyahu's Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, went on to bomb Gaza into oblivion at the cost of more than 30,000 lives in an open-air prison camp where 43.5% of the population was aged 14 or under. The comment came from pure ignorance of Gaza-Israel history and the dynamic between the two cultures. There was no mention of the most obvious fact that Israeli military and intelligence, the IDF, Mossad and Shin Bet, are among the most technologically advanced and sophisticated in the world, and they clearly allowed Hamas terrorist operatives to breach the Gaza border fence in multiple places. The Israeli government created and funded Hamas as opposition to the Palestinian Liberation Organization of leader Yasser Arafat. This is well known. I've written in great detail in books like The Trigger about the cutting-edge nature of Israeli intelligence and surveillance technology, in which it is a world leader. Former members of the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, stated publicly after the Hamas October 7th attacks that defense sensors are so sophisticated that if a cockroach or bird went near them, the IDF would immediately know. They said it was not possible for Hamas to breach the fence in multiple locations without the knowledge and response of the IDF. But that is what happened. The Israel government subjected its own population to what followed to provide the excuse for the Gaza genocidal mass bombing. There was no mention of this by the Mams, Peterson, or Shapiro, or that Hamas was a creation of the Israeli government. Did the cerebral genius not know? Even if Peterson had known and made these points, Shapiro would have been furious at such insubordination. The academic faced a fierce and immediate public backlash for the Netanyahu tweet, and many re-evaluated their view of him. A chunk of his followers walked away. Large numbers didn't. This is what happens when you promote MAM people to alternative prominence that have no idea what they're talking about and would not say it if they did. For sure, this is no accident. The attacks that Egypt warned Israel were imminent were allowed to happen because it gave Israel the excuse to take control of Gaza and continue the ethnic cleansing of Arabs from what the Israeli government claims for its own. It is the technique that I dubbed in the 1990s problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, trigger a public reaction of do something, and then offer the solutions to the problems that you have created. There is a version that I call no problem, reaction, solution, which we see with human-caused climate change and COVID. You don't need a real problem, only the public perception of one. The cult-owned government of Israel bombed Gaza into oblivion again, thanks to the actions of its gophers leading Hamas, who would have well known what the consequences would be for the people of Gaza when it has happened so many times before. Hamas leaders, meanwhile, were making video statements from Qatar. If Netanyahu and his fellow psychopaths had been genuine rather than in on the whole scam, they would have taken action against Qatar for hosting Hamas leaders. They didn't. Candace Owens, a presenter with Shapiro's Daily Wire, did challenge Israel's genocidal mass murder in Gaza, and when the cult-owned Anti-Defamation League, ADL, began to target her, the outcome was inevitable. She was fired by Daily Wire bossman and Netanyahu stooge, Shapiro. He made his name attacking the woke cancel culture, but of course that aversion to censorship has never included criticism of Israel and ongoing mass murder of Palestinian civilians. This was still more evidence of the Israel-centric hijack of the mainstream alternative media, MAM, which transformed into the DIAAC, Defend Israel at All Costs. MAM god Musk jumps to attention when Israel barks its orders, and they are invariably unquestioning advocates of Israel, which can do no wrong, or terrified of criticizing he who must be obeyed. Some of us have rather more integrity and a backbone made of steel, not jelly. My congratulations go to Candace Owens for having both on this issue. She suited the Shapiro agenda as a black woman brilliantly calling out the Black Lives Matter scam, but crossed the line with Israel, which would potentially enter the cult's inner sanctum, and she was gone, from the Daily Wire anyway. Owens revealed her own cognitive dissonance by converting to Roman Catholicism a few weeks later, of which more in a moment. Some in the MAM did begin to break ranks on Israel when the Gaza slaughter showed no sign of ending, and charity food aid workers were killed in an Israeli attack in Gaza that clearly targeted them. I've been exposing the Israel connection since the mid-1990s and been mass censored ever since as a result. I hope that as the Israel link to the global cult becomes ever more obvious, that those MAMs who are not agents of Israel will be speaking out more on this subject by the time you read this. To ignore the Israel connection is to show you are not informed and/or you have no spine when it matters. No one needs to see the Israeli government for what it is more than Jewish people who are being mercilessly manipulated by their cult-owned leaders. Jordan Peterson is fronting up the most obvious controlled opposition organization known as ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, with its highly symbolic catchphrase, "Welcome aboard the ARC." I watched a very informative investigation of the ARC and its backers in an internet video by a researcher posting under the pseudonym Polly St. George on her Rumble channel, Amazing Polly. We will certainly disagree on many things, not least religion, but on the theme of the MAM hijack, we see many of the same patterns. She noted that Jordan Peterson announced the creation of ARC in an interview with Joe Rogan, another MAM interview, in January 2023. ARC's first conference was in London the following autumn, attended by some of the most non-alternative people you could imagine. These included former Australian Prime Ministers Tony Abbott and long-time cult gopher John Howard, the second longest-serving Aussie PM, who has appeared in my books many times over the years. There was former Australian Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson and US Representative Dan Crenshaw, who serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. All are on ARC's advisory board. Crenshaw was a lieutenant commander in the US military SEAL teams and was named a young global leader of the World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab, which ARC claims to oppose. Crenshaw says he was named without his knowledge. Another speaker at the London ARC conference was UK Government Minister Michael Gove, an ultra-establishment figure who could not spell the word alternative. Let's give him a clue. It starts with an A, mate. Gove has filled a number of cabinet positions under Conservative Prime Ministers David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and Rishi Sunak. He is a member of the far-right dominated Henry Jackson Society that locks into the neoconservative or neocon network in the United States that was behind the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq in 2001 and 2003. Gove contended that the UK did not need UN approval to invade Iraq because the UK is a democracy, while non-democratic countries on the UN Security Council had a veto over military action. He's vehemently pro-Israel, as with all neocons, and argues that Israel's seizure of Arab land was legitimate. No wonder he and Peterson get on. The ARC mix involves those supporting the carbon net zero policy that employs fraudulent climate change to justify dystopia, and those building digital cities that allow total control through AI. Holly St. George gets to the core of ARC when she delves into the backers, funders, and creators of the organization. Peterson claims in his ARC videos that he had the idea for the organization after meeting people organically around the Western world, from North America to Europe and Australia, New Zealand, who supported his idea for what became ARC. He had a vision for, quote, another story for the world. Letting individuals decide their own story was not enough, it seems. They need others to tell them what that story should be. Peterson said that he began to formulate ARC with people he knew in the UK. The cornerstone of ARC is the Legatum Institute, the philanthropic arm of a massive global investment fund, Dubai-based Legatum Capital. Baroness Philippa Stroud, a co-founder of ARC, is the Legatum Institute CEO and a member of the House of Lords who founded the Centre for Social Justice in 2003. Two ARC notables are Kevin Tebbit, former director of the British Intelligence GCHQ Listening Centre and a permanent secretary at the Ministry of Defence, and Paul Marshall, co-founder and chairman of Marshall Wace, one of Europe's largest hedge fund groups, which was launched in 1997 with a $25 million investment from major cult operative George Soros. The company was worth $630 million by 2020. Marshall is one of the driving forces behind ARC, and his friend, Baroness Stroud, became CEO of ARC in November 2023. Her occupation is described as a think tanker, and among her policy priorities are more, quote, refugee children coming to the UK and government becoming more involved in, quote, family relationships. Both are cult agendas that I've been exposing for a long time. These connections are a glaring example of what constitutes alternative since COVID. Legatum was founded in 2007 by Christopher Chandler. His brother, Richard, founded the Chandler Foundation and has connections to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, World Bank, and U.S. Intelligence Front, USAID. Alan McCormick is another partner in Legatum and a former vice president of marketing with JP Morgan. Cult-owned MasterCard is a funder of at least one Legatum philanthropic venture, while MasterCard also partners with George Soros. If you wanted a group of the least alternative people, then here they are. And Peterson's ARC is their baby. The pseudo-alternative UK television station, GB News, was founded in 2020 by Legatum and Legatum-connected Paul Marshall. There are few more obvious here and no further operations than GB News, who happily fire anyone that crosses the line into real journalism and exposure of the cult agenda. Needless to say that, as with Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, GB News refuses to interview me, including MAM presenter Neil Oliver. An interview was arranged with my sons, Gareth and Jamie, but cancelled once it was publicised and GB News lied to them about the reason. GB News is there only to appear to be alternative by questioning woke and climate policy, a common theme with new media activists and billionaires. Cross the line into anything close to cult connections and you're out the door. How can you claim to be alternative when GB News employs Conservative Party politicians to present their shows, including COVID Prime Minister Boris Johnson? It's crazy, crazy. GB News and ARC are masks on the same face, controlled by the same people. Paul Marshall backs another UK alternative operation called Unheard, which says that its mission is to push back against the herd mentality with new and bold thinking. Okay, how bold? Prosperity UK was another Marshall company. And when Polly St. George checked out ARC on the UK Companies House website, she found that its previous name was Prosperity UK. Peterson claims ARC emerged from support for his idea on his travels, and it should not have had any previous name, therefore. But it did. The organization created by hedge funder Paul Marshall. She also found two directors listed for ARC, Marshall and Legatum partner Alan McCormick. ARC is a front for billionaires and the only so far agenda of the cult-infiltrated mainstream alternative media, MAM. Is Peterson aware that his organic story is not true? Or is he just not bright enough to see how he's being used? Only he knows. Although I concluded a long time ago that people like Peterson are not even nearly as intelligent as many believe. Word salad narrators may sound intelligent and intellectual. This does not mean that they are. ARC claims to be challenging the cult-owned World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab. I don't agree. I say that ultimately ARC is another version of the WEF designed to pull in the naive. ARC opposes, in quotes, the WEF hard sell agenda and instead goes for the soft sell of basically the same agenda. Pushbackers on cult plans reject the hard sell, and the idea is to convince them to buy the soft sell to the same end. Schwab, who announced a change of role at the WEF from 2025, was mentored, psychologically cloned, by the infamous cult operative Henry Kissinger. The WEF coordinates the cult's dystopian agenda between world leaders and the intellectual elite, and has its infamous Young Global Leaders training scheme, in which targeted young people are promoted and prepared to become world leaders of the future, and, in the words of Schwab, penetrate the cabinets. These have included British Prime Minister and cult clone Tony Blair, Angela Merkel, longtime Chancellor of Germany, Nicolas Sarkozy, President of France, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, a former Rothschild employee, Jacinda Ardern, the Blair aide Prime Minister of New Zealand and COVID extremist, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada and COVID extremist, Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Canadian Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, COVID extremist and WEF operative, and Gavin Newsom, Governor of California and COVID extremist. Schwab has claimed that Russia's Vladimir Putin is a WEF Young Global Leader graduate. Others include Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Amazon founder and owner of the Washington Post, Larry Page, an official founder of Google, Mark Zuckerberg, official founder of Facebook, Nicholas Zenstrom, founder of Skype, Jimmy Whale, founder of cult narrative promoter Wikipedia, Jack Ma, founder of Chinese internet tech giant Alibaba, Leonardo DiCaprio, actor and UN climate ambassador, Bono, rock singer and Bill Gates arse licker, David de Rothschild, the green activist, and Rikan Patel, founder of climate change promoting Avaz, along with other cult agendas. Control politicians and sources of communication, and you control laws and perception. Don't worry, a few people can't control the world, right? Peterson's ARC has its version of WEF Young Global Leaders, and among them is Dutch activist Eva Vlandingerbroek. Once again, as with other MAMs, she has some relevant things to say about particular dots. Most prominently in her case is the seizing of farming land in the Netherlands and Europe, mass migration, and the WEF. She is clearly unaware of the scale of the human and spiritual panorama, and there lies the problem. This makes her a cul-de-sac, not a freeway. I wish her well with what she does. My point is that we should not fall for the idea that this is the limit of the conspiracy. It goes way deeper. Blandingerbroek's conversion to the Roman Catholic Church in 2023 at the age of 26, attended by colleagues from GB News, is an example of how a little knowledge has its dangers. Few organizations in human history have been a bigger block on freedom of thought and belief than the Roman Church, which is the relocated Church of Babylon. I've exposed the Vatican-based networks in detail over the years for their central role in mind-manipulating followers through fear, guilt, intimidation, and mass murder of heretics, plus its infamous history of child abuse. Popes have been some of the most bloodthirsty satanic tyrants ever to walk the earth. And we have had a stream of modern popes serving the cult, with the likes of Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, and Pope John Paul II. The latter's predecessor, Pope John Paul I, Albino Luciani, somehow eluded the White Smoke Mafia to become Pope in 1978,
White Smoke
only
Mafia.
to be murdered after the Freemasonically significant 33 days in office while preparing his plans to rid the Vatican of Freemason control. His murder coincided with the exposure of the Rome-based Propaganda Due, or P2, Freemasonry lodge of Mussolini fascist Liceo Gelli, which was manipulating all major aspects of Italian society through its members in government, media, intelligence, military, and business. See David Yallop's 1984 book, In God's Name, an investigation into the murder of Pope John Paul I, and my own books for the background to P2. A truth activist claiming to know about the global conspiracy while converting to a central pillar of the conspiracy betrays the level of ignorance that pervades the MAM. Blandingerbroek said she did so because we are involved in a spiritual war. Well, unfortunately, Eva, you chose the wrong ally, mate, and that should have been obvious to you. She posted at Christmas 2023, quote, "Over 2,000 years ago, a child was born that came to die for all our sins. He is the Christ, the living God, the Savior of the world. Love him with all your heart, because he loves you. Have a blessed Christmas, everyone." End quote. What someone believes is nothing to do with me. That's not the issue. It is the monumental contradictions between a researcher of truth and those statements which cannot be supported by evidence outside of the Bible and the Christian narrative, a Bible whose content was decided and dictated by the Roman Church. If Jesus died to forgive all human sin, that must include Van Dingerbroek's targets, Schwab, Gates, and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. If Jesus is the Saviour of the world, born 2,000 years ago, when's he going to start with the Saviour bit? Humanity's need for left-brain certainty, which depends on corpus callosum suppression, instigates the cognitive dissonance necessary for such contradictions to prevail. I read this in a Christian internet article, quote, "Jesus' death brings forgiveness because it serves as a substitutionary sacrifice. His perfect life without sin made him the only suitable candidate to pay the price for humanity's sins. By willingly giving up his life, Jesus offered himself as a perfect sacrifice that satisfied the demands of justice, allowing God to extend his forgiveness to humanity. The death of Jesus reveals the immense love of God for humanity. It demonstrates that God was willing to give up his own Son, the ultimate sacrifice, to reconcile humanity back to himself. It is a vivid display of God's unconditional love and desire for restoration with his creation." End quote. If any of that is true, we have a, quote, God that is both masochistic and stupendously stupid. The idea that God would want his son sacrificed for the sins of psychopaths and Satanists has got to be a very definition of ridiculous. And it kicks shape-shifting reptilians way out of the park when it comes to weird. How can the same brain that believes this to be true also believe that it's researching the conspiracy based on pursuing facts? Only by the right brain not talking to the left, I guess. Eva Vlandingerbroek has posted pictures of herself walking around an airport wearing an ash cross on her forehead. I think it's fair to say that she's a fanatical Catholic, and good for her. I just don't see how this fits with the uninhibited pursuit of what's going on. I can't comment on any of her Twitter X posts since she blocked me in 2023. She gets serious promotion from Tucker Carlson, Jordan Peterson, and the MAM, which is dominated by the Christian belief system. The MAM clique has become full of itself, with its stars believing their own publicity and hype. I saw Vlandingerbroek portray herself as Joan of Arc, on horseback brandishing the hammer of pagan god Thor. This was not very Roman Catholic. And when the story becomes you covering the story and not the story itself, the true meaning and reason for the alternative media evaporates. Her religious conversion would seem to have been prompted by hearing a speech in 2017 by Dr. Peter Kreeft, a Catholic philosopher and convert, called 7 Reasons Why Everyone Should Be Catholic. Among them was that the Catholic faith is true, it's good, it's beautiful, its veracity is proven by facts of history, it produces saints, it gets people to heaven, and it's where people actually meet Jesus Christ. None of this is supported by any evidence whatsoever, except that the Roman Church does declare saints, many of which have been some of the most violent mass killers of non-believers that history has recorded. It's very alternative. Eva Vlandingerbroek posted a clip of Kreeft on Twitter X with the line, "Beware of the I'm spiritual but not religious types." I must be a blasphemer then. The clip had Kreeft saying, "The devil is very spiritual. He hates matter. And religion means relationship with God. If you know who God is, that relationship starts with humility. But spirituality lacks humility. Oh, I'm very spiritual." That's what the Pharisees said too. I think that's ridiculous and dangerous. I'm not spiritual, I'm religious. End quote. Humility is to kill vast numbers of people who see reality differently and to exploit fear and guilt to ensnare the minds of children for life. I'm staggered that someone so barely one-dimensional could have convinced Vlandingerbroek to buy this crap. We can't expand into the enormity of what is happening while its advocates sit on the barricade with guards at every exit. They are promoted to attract the biggest audiences, which then believe that what they are seeing is it, when what they are being told is only a fraction of it. The theme of religion is very relevant in the MAM hijack. The alternative media has always been dominated by Christian belief, and this is being ramped up today. I've noticed, and I'm not alone, that many MAM personalities are converting to a religion, voicing their religion more loudly than they did before, or changing their anti-religion stance. I doubt this is a coincidence. American activist Candace Owens converted to Roman Catholicism in the spring of 2024, while Russell Brand posted a video of himself doing the Catholic rosary and saying Christian prayers. He was later baptized and said that Jesus is real. Brand's wife is Roman Catholic, and Jordan Peterson's wife has converted to Roman Catholicism with support from Vlandingerbroek after she was, quote, cured of cancer by praying with rosaries blessed by the Pope and another owned by her great-grandmother. This would be nothing to do with Roman Catholicism, and rather the power of the mind and belief on the body. What you believe, you perceive, and what you perceive, you experience. We'll see how this works later. Even people like Candace Owens, who I respect for her unrelenting stance on many issues, as her reality founded on, quote, Christ is King. I've no idea what this is supposed to mean. He's king of what? I would say think it through and apply open-minded research and logic to what is constantly repeated by reflex action. I watched an outpouring of Christ is King on Twitter X after it was apparently suggested that the phrase is anti-Semitic. But then what isn't? One post included a highly symbolic picture of the human plight. The post said, Christians ignore the campaign to mark Christ is King as anti-Semitic. Ignore it with all your might. Christ is King, and every knee will bow and confess that he is Lord. End quote. The same people talk about the need to be free. What, on your knees? My reply did not go down well with many, but it was heartfelt. Quote, when humanity stops bending the knee to anyone, we might just have a shot at this freedom we talk about. Human race, get off your knees. You'll never be free while you're on them, whatever the reason. End quote. How people can't see the obvious contradiction of demanding freedom while telling people to bend the knee to Jesus as their Lord is truly beyond me. Alex Jones and the vast majority of the MAM inner core go along with Jesus is Lord or Jesus is King. Russell Brand says he's now a born-again Christian, wears a cross and follows Jesus. He said he's reading the Bible a lot more. YouTube influencer and anti-woke comedian J.P. Sears announced that he was converting to Christianity. Quote, I was excluding some amazing traditional Christian values, beliefs of God and ways of connecting with God that I now really value, but out of what I would call spiritual arrogance. I was excluding them, just judging them. I didn't believe in the immense power of prayer. End quote. Why do you have to convert to Christianity for any of this? Prayer is the interaction of intent with the simulation field or consciousness beyond the simulation, which can manifest in matter what you pray for. Joe Rogan has not been a religious advocate before, but he has been covering Christianity more frequently and said this in his podcast, quote, I think that as time rolls on, people are going to understand the need to have some sort of divine structure to things, some sort of belief in the sanctity of love and of truth. And a lot of that comes from religion. A lot of people's moral compass and the guidelines that they've used to follow to live a just and righteous life has come from religion. And unfortunately, a lot of intelligent people, they dismiss all the positive aspects of religion because they think that the stories are mere superstitious fairy tales that have no place in the modern world. And we're inherently good and your ethics are based on your own moral compass, and we all have one. And that's not necessarily true. We need Jesus, I think, for real. If he came back now, it'd be great. Like Jesus, if you're thinking about coming back, now's a good time. End quote.
Yeah.
There is surely more to know about this MAM religion deal, and we'll see where it goes from here, I guess. Focusing on a religious hero to come and save us is certainly a benefit for the cult. Jesus will come and sort it out. Have faith. The PSYOP that was QAnon during the first Trump presidency was a version of this. We were told by an anonymous source known as Q that there was a plan to replace the bad guys with the good guys. Arrests were going to be made. My goodness, how many times I have seen this card played under different guises since I set out in 1990. A mythical good guy group of insiders had everything in hand. Trust the plan was the mantra, when it was a cult deep state psyop. There was never any plan except to mislead and stitch up Trump-supporting pushbackers. The whole fiasco was only buying time for the cult agenda to further advance unmolested. The plan led to the breach of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, 2021, after which a long list of decent, if misguided, people were arrested and jailed for high crimes that were simply a case of communal trespass. They were clearly allowed into the building, as was Hamas into Israel. I wrote from the day it happened that the Capitol breach had been manipulated to allow the trespass to be labeled an insurrection, with all the police state and political potential that offered. January the 6th was a deep state cult psyop sting, and tens of millions in the United States and others around the world bought the QAnon lie because it told them what they wanted to hear. What a mind control technique this is. Tell people what they want to hear, and the door of acceptance is already swinging open. Tell them what they don't want to hear, as I've done for 35 years, and the door is padlocked. A cascade of abuse awaits anyone with the backbone to go there. Donald will save us is another case of telling people what they want to hear. A belief that Jesus is coming back is a global version of the QAnon sting. Trust the plan. God has a plan. Oh, thank you, Jesus, for sending your John the Baptist, the blessed Donald, to prepare for your return. I wish that was happening. I really do. How much easier it would be for someone else to come and make everything right. Jesus isn't coming, and the Donald is a psyop to buy still more breathing space for a cult agenda to reach its goal. We have to do it. Bad news, I know. True all the same.
Alexa, pause. Well, that was a bit of a deep dive, a lot deeper than I thought it would go. I feel what he was saying about all the social media advocates interviewing each other before the election, that definitely happened. I'm going to have to listen to this again just to get a bit more into my head. There was lots of things going on in my head at the same time. For instance, could I even get this onto YouTube? I've tried in the past to get my thoughts on COVID on YouTube. And this was just my thoughts. It was a little comedy skit I put together. And I tried to put it on YouTube and I lost privileges. I was told to take a test, which was all like something you'd do at work about learning to wash your hands in hospitality. But it was to do with COVID. And if I didn't take the test, then I wouldn't be allowed to put videos up longer than 25 minutes. So I had to take the test. So whether I get this up or not is remaining to be seen. I don't even know whether Facebook could allow some of that. It was a lot deeper than I thought. We eventually got onto the reptilians. I think we'll give it one more chapter and see how we go. But I don't want to lose my YouTube channel at this early stage. But let's just see what happens. It was interesting. He is quite cynical, I thought, personally. And he seemed, as I even spoke out at the time, jealous of other people. However, he's banned from going to 29 countries. I didn't know that. Fucking hell. Just for writing books. So that is kind of like probably a reason why he is cynical. But it also might be a reason why the other people can't interview him. For instance, if he can't travel to the US, then he can't get on Joe Rogan podcast. And I doubt very much Joe Rogan is going to go to the Isle of Wight. So there are lots of bits and pieces, so on and so forth. Let's just crack on with one more chapter and see where this goes. And I think I'm going to have a beer for chapter 3. All right, see you in a bit. Let me get this uploaded and then I can start chapter 3. All the best.